to it. There you go. Welcome everyone to the Liberating Structures call. If it's your first time here, this is a space that we create so that we can have somewhere to practice those skills, those liberating structures, and also other activities directly inspired by liberating structures. And today we have two on the menu. Our first one will be Ecocycle planning, which Rob Cunning will tell us all about it, but it's a prioritizing liberating structure. And then after that, Kristen will introduce us to Troika, which is a problem-solving, very different liberating structure, but it's a nice little duo because one leads to the other. Of course, first you look at the problems and then you start to solve them. Without further ado, Rob, with you.
Can I just interject? The 1 o'clock. Can I just say that the Troika consulting is at 1 o'clock, so that the main session is Ecocycle with Rob. But if you can stay after 1 to do Troika with Kristin, please do. Yeah.
Great. So thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Joram, and welcome everyone. My name is Rob Cunning. I'm a consultant microbiologist by training, but I'm also a QI and clinical audit lead in Children's Health Ireland in Temple Street in Dublin, where it is a nice, I don't know if you can see there, it's a nice sunny day. Yeah, so we're going to go through Ecocycle planning. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So this is, as Jorian said, this is a really useful liberating structure in terms of you know, as a planning tool, as a sorting tool, but it also is a tool that can point you in the direction of what sort of what your next steps need to be, what sort of skill set you need to be looking at when addressing particular problems. But specifically, what I'm going to try and do today is we're going to go for a walk in the woods, we're in the chat earlier on. Kristen was talking about the importance of place, and these are actually woodlands near where I live, where I bring the dog for a walk on a Saturday morning. And I think when you look at these sort of woods, and you instantly sort of feel that this is the sort of place that you would like to be, and what Ecocycle planning in particular does is it takes this sort of metaphor of place and of this sort of organic place and applies it to problem solving. And in particular, Ecocycle planning is really useful for sort of trying to shift people out of the sort of mechanical or clockwork model of how systems work, and towards a more complex model, a more sort of organic model. And I think one of the things that anybody who uses liberating structures, or if you use any sort of complexity-based approach, or you just involved in quality improvement, over time you do find your language shifting from this sort of mechanistic model to a more sort of organic or biological model. And in particular, what we're trying to move from is away from a model of sort of where everything is sort of predictable and controlled, to a model where there's a sort of continuous change and a continuous cycle. So again, going back to this idea of like going for a walk in the woods, well, we've got sort of two choices in terms of the sort of woods where we might go for a walk. So on the one hand, we could go for a walk in this sort of forest. This is sort of a monoculture forest, or basically a tree farm. So yeah, it's woods, there's lots of trees, but there's a lack of diversity. There's a degree of sterility to this. There's also a lack of resilience within this system. The monoculture, and that makes it much more prone to disease, much more prone to fire damage. And in order to create these forests, you have to kind of force things. It's forced management. You have to deliberately put things in place. And let's face it, walking in these sort of woods is pretty boring. What is much preferable is to go for a walk in sort of a natural mixed growth forest. So here you've got diversity. It's a vibrant place. It's full of bird song and insects, and I know Peter is a beekeeper. There's probably some lots of swarms of bees there as well. It's resilient. It's a system that adapts over time, and there is a high degree of self-management to this system, and it's appealing. Looks like it's a much nicer place to be. So when we're looking at the systems that we're working in, either at an individual level or at a team level or at an organization level, eco-cycle planning is a way of moving from that sort of mechanical approach where you sort of say, we've got an idea, we're just going to develop it, there, it's done, move on, nothing to see here, to this concept of the renewal loop, that things are constantly changing, constantly in flux over time. So when we look at the biological metaphor for complex systems, and we look at the natural mixed growth forest, in order for that forest to survive, in order for it to be healthy, different parts of the forest are going to be in different stages. So on the one hand here in the top left-hand corner, you're going to have areas of the forest where there's lots of open ground, and where you literally just have seeds or just seedlings starting to get a foothold. There's new planting going on. And then you have in the bottom left-hand corner, you have these areas of intense competition where there's rapid growth, and you've got trees and bushes and lots of plants competing with each other to try and get up there and get to the light, competing with each other for the nutrients. So it's very, very vibrant, very active growth going on. Then you've got in the top right-hand corner, you've got areas of the forest where you have maturity, where you've got big trees, it's nice and peaceful. It's that image that we have of a forest. There's still lots of life, there's still lots of vibrancy, but it's much more settled compared to the areas of sort of intense growth and competition. And then you have areas where the forest is on fire, or where a storm has blown down some big trees. You've got areas of destruction. But of course, those areas of destruction are what create the space for the renewal, for the new planting to occur. So in a healthy forest, you're going to have different areas, in these different stages at different times, and each area is going to move, between these sort of phases over time as well. And that's the model that if we work in a complex adaptive system, and particularly if we work in healthcare, that is the model that we're actually working in. So let's get to it. So we have, can I just check, Matthew, how many people have we got on at the moment?
25, it looks like.
Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is, so this is just, you can see this is actually what I've drawn behind me. So this is an example of the Ecocycle planning, and in a moment, Jorian's going to set up an interactive whiteboard that we can all contribute to. And the idea here is to look at sort of projects, commitments, anything that occupies a significant portion of your time, and identify what quadrant does it fit into. is it something that's you're literally just planting the seed? It's brand new, or you're completely renewing it from scratch. So it'll be in this top left-hand quadrant. Is it something that you're really putting time and effort into it? You're really trying to get it to grow. You're trying to outcompete the competition. So you're in that growth phase, then it's going to be in the bottom left-hand quadrant. If it's something that is mature, something that has reached a level of maturity where it doesn't need as much effort to keep it going, it's pretty sort of stable over time, then it's going to be in that top right quadrant. And if it's something that you are literally in the process of tearing it up, or you're in the process of cutting away sections of it, or it's literally on fire, like either and whether you were the one who struck the match or somebody else has said that project ends now, then it's going to be in that bottom right-hand corner, that sort of that creative destruction. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, when Jorian has set up the interactive board, is that I want you to pick 2 projects that occupy a significant portion of your time. These can be work-related, non-work-related, it doesn't matter. And using the interactive board, so it'll be kind of like the sort of virtual post-it notes, put on the Ecocycle map where you think those projects currently sit. You don't have to identify what those projects are, but just so long as you know where which ones are yours. So, Jordan, do you want to? I just stop sharing.
The link is
here.
already in the chat. Please click over there. You will see exactly the same board, but in an interactive space. And I think myself, I'm going to just briefly share my screen so you folks can ignore it. It's just so we have it on the video, which is nice for the future, just for future reference. And here I am. And here's the board, but please just go to the website and add your post-its. Let me also give you one very tiny extra nudge. Generally, when you put an idea there, it's not going to be on the X point. It's not going to be on the cardinal point. It's going to be somewhere around the slide. And just thinking about where in the slide is more over here, is more over there, is generally quite a useful thought exercise.
Give another minute.
What did you say, Rob?
We just give people another minute or two.
Appears to me that there's still some vibrance, but if you feel like it's time to move on, you're the man.
I think people, there's still a few being added there. We'll give it another minute.
Okay.
Okay, so you can see there's a huge range of sort of sort of projects and activities that people have put up, but also I think one of the things that you realize that and you could imagine if we're doing this in in a face-to-face setting, we'd be doing it sort of on a whiteboard with post-it notes. If you see people start to put things up, but they start to kind of think about it and sort of move it around, and so this isn't there isn't a sort of a very sort of precise everything fits into this quadrant or that quadrant. That there's there is a even as you're putting things up, you realize, oh, it's actually moving. Maybe it's just on the borderline between one quadrant and the next, and it's a reflection of that the eco-cycle is very much something that it's a dynamic process, and and particularly if you're doing this with a with a team, there is a sense of dynamism and movement even to sort of where things get placed on the board. So why do this? What is this actually? What is the purpose of all of this? So the first thing is that it gives you an indication of now obviously we're a mixed group, but if you were doing this either as as an individual, and I mean we mentioned it during the sort of preamble, I do kind of an eco-cycle just for my own projects about once every 6 months. So I use the fact that this week's session as an excuse to do one, and I sort of compare it then with the one from the previous 6 months, and I look to see, have projects moved? Are they still stuck in that same quadrant? Are they, are there, things on there that literally have just been in the same spot for the last 6 months, the last 12 months, whatever it might be, and it gives me a sense of where I am and where where my priorities should be for the next 6 months. The second thing to point out, and actually Matthew made this comment that I noticed in the chat, is that it's interesting to see where the sort of the projects or the activities tend to cluster. And I've done this with lots and lots of different groups, and typically what you find is that bottom left quadrant, the growth quadrant, the competition quadrant, that's where you tend to get the biggest concentration of sort of projects and ideas. So stuff that has started, there's lots of energy and activity going into it, but there also tends to be an awful lot of them. And again, at individual or team level, that can be problematic because they're not all going to succeed. You typically also tend to get quite a few in the sort of maturity section. Although it's interesting that I think when you do this with groups who are involved in quality improvement, you get less in the maturity segment than you do with other groups, which I think is there. Matthew mentioned that there didn't seem to be many falling into that group, and I think it's just the nature of people who are involved in quality improvement. And then you get probably the quadrant then that is kind of tends to be next lowest on the list is the sort of the renewal, the ones where it's literally things are just getting planted. And then the quadrant that typically has the least number of projects in it is the creative destruction. Now it's interesting that Mary's just asked there about do you use this to identify overload and pause projects? Absolutely. So again, you can imagine if we were all part of if we were all part of a quality improvement team, in a healthcare institution, and we were looking at this and we sort of realized that we've got so many things down there in that bottom left growth area, and we just don't have people, we don't have the resources to deliver on all of those. We have to make space. We have to cut things out. Or sometimes it's a case of saying we've got loads of stuff in the maturity section. What can we move around into that creative destruction to create the space to then move the newer projects further around the cycle? So it is, I think, very useful from that perspective. In terms of identifying, the things that you can get rid of, or the areas where you can make space, or the things that you just have to stop doing because there is actually, as I said, there's just overload of too many projects in that sort of that growth or competition phase. So I think Kristen was asking about why that quadrant on growth is high. I think a lot of times this is a reflection of both at individual and team levels. Is we tend to take on lots of new things. We tend to innovate rather than exnovate. So we tend not to balance the taking on of new activities with archiving or getting rid of old activities. Even when I'm doing kind of the Ecocycle for myself, for my own project. So oftentimes what I do is, in terms of that creative destruction bit, I kind of extend that a bit to sort of say, are there things there that I can just I can actually just pass on to somebody else. So it's kind of, I'm pruning them from my activity, but maybe identifying somebody that I can delegate them to. So that's sort of the first thing, is just kind of that overview of where you're at with your individual or team projects. Are there too many stuck in one quadrant? Are they sort of moving between them? The second way that the Ecocycle can be really useful then is identifying, what are the actions that you require within each of the different quadrants. So what I'll do here,
Rob, would you like to go back to your sharing?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my slides.
Cool. Let's do it.
And let me just. Oh. Yeah. So. The computer is being slow here. There we go. So so one of the ways that this could be useful is to look at the sort of actions that you require to sort of move things along within the different quadrants. So in that sort of that top left sort of birth or renewal quadrant, again, and this is very much going back to the sort of the biological metaphors, is this idea that you are preparing the ground. You're trying to get the conditions right for planting and for things to start to grow. And so the key thing that you need in this is trying to connect people together. It's trying to leverage creativity, and this is actually where the concept of kind of the network weavers or systems convening really comes into its own, because the sort of skill that you need, or the sort of person that you need when you're in this segment, is the networker. It's the person who can go out and has the ability to work across silos, to be that sort of boundary spanner, if we're using the language of complexity science. Then in that burst, that active growth segment, this is where you're, with the biological metaphors, this is where you're pouring on the fertilizer. This is where you're trying to get ahead of the competition. You're really trying to push and strive for success, because you're trying to push up that slope towards maturity. This is where you need your entrepreneur. This is where you need, the kind of the go-getter, the person who is willing to sort of, go that extra mile. The person who's willing to innovate in order to get things done. Then in the kind of the maturity section, this is where you're trying to maintain your project. You're trying to extend its life. You're trying to sustain it. You're trying to ensure that it remains efficient, and you're then you're harvesting the output. In my case, if we have something like a successful antimicrobial stewardship project or a surveillance project, we're getting to that in the Duran trilogy, you're talking about that getting to that stage of kind of sustained output. So you're just kind of keeping things going, making sure that everything is working fine. So the kind of skill set that you need in this area is a manager. You need somebody who can keep all of these, keep all the projects going as efficiently as possible. And then finally, in that bottom right segment, in the kind of the creative destruction. So again, back to the biological metaphors here, you're this is around, this is around sort of, setting fires. It's around pruning out the dead wood. It's around composting, or the concept of exnovating, of getting rid of the things that no longer provide value. And the sort of skill set, the sort of person that you need in this segment is the heretic. You need you need the rebel, or as Helen Bevan talks about, the kind of the healthcare radical, the person who can rock the boat without falling out. And to me, this is one of the most useful functions of using the Ecocycle, is identifying the areas where you could potentially exnovate, and I have to credit Neil Spenceley in Glasgow, who came up with the Dalek idea originally. But one of the things as well is that, when you look at these sort of different skill sets, none of us have all of those. None of us are, a networker and an entrepreneur and a manager and a heretic. So you generally, when you're looking at sort of all these projects, you realize that actually you need lots of different people with different mixes of skill sets. The other way that this is useful is identifying what are the blockages of moving from one quadrant to the next. And these are the sort of the different traps that you can potentially fall into. So when you're moving from that sort of initial sort of planting renewal phase to the growth phase, this is where you hit the poverty trap. This is where it's lack of resources, lack of people, lack of time. That you just simply don't have the space or the resources to move something from that planting phase to the growth phase, which is where you really have to be able to put time and effort into something. When you move from that birth to maturity phase, and this is something that I think happens all of the time in quality improvement, is the founder trap. This is where there's one individual who's the driver, the real entrepreneur, the person who's really pushing this project, and they leave or they move on to another project, and when they go, the project falls. So that one of the things when you are in this section around with working on different projects is trying to ensure how do you actually design yourself out of the project so that you can hand it on to somebody who has that more sort of managerial expertise and can maintain it in the segment of maturity. Moving from maturity to creative destruction, I mean, this is probably the most challenging step, and probably where we see, where this is probably the most common trap, and that's the rigidity trap. That's where, this is where you get, resistance to change. Particularly if people put a lot of time and effort into designing a system and getting it up and running, and hey, it's running, it seems to be running really well. We tend to be disinclined to then look at it and sort of say, well, actually, not just how do we do this better, but actually, is there stuff that we can stop doing? Is there stuff that we can cut out of this? Or should we stop doing this altogether? Is it no longer providing value? And two words I find that are often a clue that you're dealing with the rigidity trap is if the words meeting and committee come up a lot in conversation. That's often a sign that there's that resistance to change is there. And then finally, if you do have, if a project has been sort of pruned, if it has been destroyed, you have the despair trap that people sort of say that they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They don't know how do we move on, how do we restart. And again, this is where your networker is really important in terms of bringing people together and saying, actually, there is a way that we can move forward. So there's lots of different ways that I say you can use this. I mean, I've mentioned already sort of doing just at an individual level. You can do it at team levels. I mean, this is an example of one where in a given team, what they've done is you can color code different types of projects. There's a lot of different ways and different levels that you can use that at. So I'm going to sharing there now, and we'll just go back to the chat. Matthew, Jordan, I don't know if if we want to just open it to discussion, or with the numbers that we have, we probably don't need to go into breakout rooms. But I'm curious if people have had experience of using the Ecocycle planning, or if it's something that, if you haven't used it, is it something that sort of resonates with you, that you could see a role for?
So folks, if you have any questions or experiences to share, I would ask you to use the raise hand function here on Zoom, which is in this bar in the bottom. You'll see in the reactions button, there is an option to raise a hand, and then we'd go one by one. Okay. Lisanne, go ahead.
I just start with my reaction when they started, because I think so I was especially interested because I often find myself doing a lot of creative destruction, and but probably maybe destroying things at a rate that I can't renew. And I realized when I saw the loop that my heart sank a bit, because I realized I like the linear model provides this myth that you kind of get through, well, I'll do this bit and then it's done, and that thing will sit in maturity forever, and somehow there's an overarching myth that eventually everything will be in maturity. I'll just kind of sit back and it'll be all right. Whereas actually the loop's far more realistic, but it's a reminder of that.
I know exactly. I think but I've done this with different teams where, I mean, you can see when people put the stuff up on the whiteboard, and people see how much stuff is down in that bottom left hand corner and how much stuff is up in the maturity corner and how little is in the other ones. You can literally see the eyes opening in the room, and it is because, as you say, if you only look at that linear model, you are only getting half of the picture. As Jory mentioned at the outset, you can then use things like Troika Consulting, or any of the kind of or a liberating structure like something like, say, TRIZ, where you're trying to construct or design the exact opposite of what it is you want to achieve. That can be really useful for identifying the practices that you can get rid of, or identifying with the Troika Consulting, particularly in that kind of networking section, or just trying to as a way of innovating to move from one segment to the next. So so I think there's a lot of other liberating structures that you can tag on to this, and use this as your initial mapping exercise. I think that in sort of systems convening, there is this concept of I think I'm not sure I've got the term right. Matthew, you can probably help me out on this. It's the convening object, that you try to you have some sort of a physical object, or a map, or a plan, or that people can identify and own, And then once you've got things up on that map, you're then giving people permission to talk about how we move things around. You're giving people permission to be innovative. And so I think, certainly for me, I think that the idea of making something visible is very powerful. Mary, you had your hand up there.
Wait. Mark was there before.
Yeah.
And just
Sorry,
a small note before I pass the voice. Matthew just posted something on the chat, which is a survey that we really need to fill it out. So if you could just open another tab, please, that really helps. But sorry, Mary, because Mark had his hand. Go for it, Mark.
How do you pronounce your first name? Actually, Jorian.
Jorian, it's a weird name. Sorry about that.
No, that's a first. Thank you very much. That's quite something. Great. Rob, thank you for your presentation and the information. I work within kind of the subjective change and growth field. And I was wondering if you had anything to say that perspective, or anyone that's kind of applying the model and that kind of arena, or field.
This is in relation to. Are you saying?
Yeah. In other words, before the types of projects that I or another person chooses has a subjectivity about oneself, and if you're wanting to go through personal change, I can see the applicability of renewal, birth, maturity, and then the challenge of creative destruction if we're talking about like a part of one's perspective or attitude or part of a personality or a skill set. So I was just wondering, kind of that subjective introspection application of this.
Yeah, no, I think it is very much so. I haven't done it in a while, but I did do this as an exercise just myself a number of years ago, where and you can sort of it maps to a certain extent to this concept of looking at the things that give you energy and the things that drain your energy, and that the kind of the things that give you energy are sort of going to be the things that are in that bottom left corner, in terms of they're the things that you want to encourage. The things that drain are going to be in that creative destruction. But then you also have to realize that you can't spend your whole time in the energy section. It's like you can't drink espresso all of the time. It's you've got to balance it out with, in the maturity section, what are the things that are sort of keep you on the level, if you like, and to me the kind of the renewal bit is that's the kind of the social part. That's kind of making connections with other people. So I have to say I haven't really teased it out properly, but I think it certainly. I think it certainly makes sense, and I think it would be a very interesting area to kind of look at in more detail.
Yeah, I appreciate those clarifications about energy and one of the other points. So that's helpful. Thanks.
Cool. Just a small time note, folks. We got 10 minutes still. Mary, would you like to?
Thank you. I mean, I was really struck by the last bit, the destruction phase. And actually, I think my reflection in all aspects of life is that I don't do that enough. And when we put the Post-it notes, the only one I could fit in that quadrant was to do with my children. But I think with work, it's very difficult. And I just wonder, so I had two questions really, one following on from the one that you were just discussing around around the people that do this kind of work. So in my experience in the NHS, they tend to be people that are maybe a bit like me, that are irritated with the fact that things aren't working, or the things that, you know, aren't going so well, or that, you know, patients aren't being managed to the best of our ability. And so you then drive change, and you're the person that, you know, is much more of the innovator, planter, entrepreneur style person. And I just wonder that without somebody telling you that you have to stop and destroy things, you know, there's a lot of driver to change within my organization. There's a lot of, you know, just external drivers, internal drivers. But when you look at drivers to stop things or chuck out stuff that's not working, there is no incentive at all to do that. That's not prioritized at all. And maybe that's a reflection of life. So it's just a question around that. And my second one is about the board behind you. So presumably that's your board that you have, and you put your projects on that. I don't know, or maybe it's just a backdrop. But I mean, I was quite interested in, you know, when your team's functioning really well, what does that look like? So, you know, you've talked about where to put the projects in the way we've seen it, but teams evolve, don't they, over time? And actually, do you ever kind of go, right, this is a snapshot, this is where we're like at our peak, we are, you know, on Everest, you know, and this is how we want to keep it, kind of thing?
Yeah, I suppose the you know the in terms of how you know, in terms of, like, as you say, that snapshot for a team, say, you know, what you really would like to see is that there's a roughly even distribution of projects between the different quadrants. But what I think is more important is that's the snapshot, but then you come back and do it again, you know, some months later, you know, whatever the time period might be. And what you want to see is that things have moved around, you know, that things have, you know, that in general things are sort of moving around the cycle, so that there's a, as I say, that it's dynamic. I completely agree with you. I mean, like, we have the same experience in the health service here, that the drivers to stop doing things are nowhere near as developed as the drivers to keep adding things. And oftentimes the driver to stop doing something is just that, you know, the funding gets pulled, or, you know, the staff don't get replaced, or whatever. So oftentimes it's, you know, it's not out of choice. But I think the some of the other liberating structures, particularly TRIZ, I find is a really useful one for getting people to start having that conversation around, you know, actually, why are we doing this? You know, what is the benefit? And the other one is the kind of you know, the what, so what, now what? You can kind of do a sort of reverse version of that, where you're deliberately sort of saying, actually, what it wants you to do is focus on the net when you come to the now what, not going, what do we add? But your first question should be, what do we stop doing? What do we take away? But it is a real challenge.
Thank you.
I think Jack, I think that.
Jack, and just another time note, this is the last question, folks, because we only got 5 minutes before Kristen starts introducing us to Troika, but we still got 5 minutes, so go for it, Jack.
Yeah, just wanted to say, first of all, thanks, Rob, and for the team for your presentation. Really helpful, and this was a new concept to me, but still really useful to think of my projects that are ongoing. I just thought it was interesting how you mentioned the traps for each section and each quadrant, and how we were all placed in that. But I was just wondering, have you done any work around what happens if you get stuck within those quadrants? Because I know one of my projects in particular is in that birth stage, and very much that creative thinking and how to get people communicating in the right way. And it's just, have you done any work on when you do, if you might get stuck in one of those quadrants, how to then move on from that?
To me, I think the key thing is you know, can you identify individuals with the requisite skill set to you know, and generally what you're doing is you're looking for somebody to, like, so if somebody is stuck you know, in the kind of, like, you know, the project has been pulled, you know, funding's gone, whatever, they're in that despair trap. What you're looking for is the skill set in the next quadrant to pull that person or pull that team into the quadrant, you know, if that makes sense. So I think wherever you get to the despair trap, you know, or to any of the traps, you look to identify, can you identify that the person with the skill set in the next quadrant, and then can you persuade them to, you know, to get involved, to take these things on. So it's the, you know, I think it's the human capital is I think is the key to moving through those traps. And then obviously there are sort of specific tools in terms of things like, you know, the, you know, sustainability of projects for that founder trap, for, you know, the kind of the more sort of some of the more kind of creative liberating structures for including things like CRIS for getting through the, you know, you know, to moving people onto sort of, you know, creative destruction. But generally I think it's you know, trying to identify the key individuals.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much, Rob, for this session. That was super cool. And everyone, please don't forget to fill that survey that we posted in the chat. It's just there right now. And just a note for the people watching this video afterwards, Troika is very breakout rooms focused, and this is the activity that Kristen is about to introduce us to. I think I'm still going to record the basic explanation, but the people watching the video won't have the full thing because breakout rooms, there's no solution to it, but I think it's still valuable to record the introduction. Thanks again, Rob, and the word is with you, Kristen.
Oh, great.
Yeah, Joriam, let me just ask, do you want to stop the recording and let's give people a little bit of chance and then start a new one, or do you want to keep it all on the same?
I think this would be like too small for a single video, but okay. With what I just said, I think the last X minutes just as an introduction, okay. So right.
Well, welcome everybody. If you are able to stay on for half an hour, we're gonna try a little Troika consulting, and but you'll see what I'm doing, and I encourage you to do the same. If you're shy, you can turn off your camera, but it would be good to stretch a little bit. We've been focused on the screen and all this like good head thinking, but like, again, maybe like reaching up to the sky. Oof, I'm gonna like tap my head. Okay, let my little brain soak in all the amazing insights from this community and from Rob. And then if you're able to, just bend down, think about those roots of the tree. Oh, water your roots a little bit. Water your roots, and then just slowly roll up and when you're ready, get a glass of something, some warm beverage. I've got a thermos full of hot water here, but whatever you have. This is a lunch and learn, so hopefully if you're eating, we're happy you're here, and if you're drinking, we're happy you're drinking something healthy. And I'm not sure that Matthew and Joria mentioned this, but this group started really by peers about a year ago, by 4 people, and 2 years ago. See how time is funny? But the idea, the thing that I love about it is that it's very relaxed. There's no experts. It's just people who have found liberating structures, either that they like or they want to have a safe space to get introduced to them or practice them. So that's what I would say. I'm not an expert, I'm a practitioner, and I really appreciate having a place where I can share things that I am intrigued by. And so what I'm going to share, and these slides will also be available. Joriam said that they'll be going out as a follow-up. So I'm going to use my share screen. I'm going to narrate what I'm doing because that helps my little brain. So you'll get these slides. These slides were produced not by me. They were produced by somebody. Matthew can put in the chat who they're produced by. But then you'll see Troika Consulting is a way that peers can get input from their colleagues. And so you can use something that might have come up in the Ecocycle. You can use something from your personal life or your professional life. And then you can use this process to get quick feedback. And the steps that we're going to do in the next 25 minutes are you will be put into random groups of 3. And after you get into your groups, I'll post the instructions again in the chat for you, and I'll send it as a message, or I'll have Joriam send it as a message. And you're just going to rotate around. So one person will start and they'll describe their challenge in a very short 2-minute nugget. And then if the person who's presenting their challenge can address any questions that the other 2 might have to clarify, oh, what's really the challenge here? Or it sounds like this. And then the person who's presented just turns their camera off and they become a fly on the wall or a bee in the garden. They're just listening. And the 2 peers start talking about, that's a really interesting. And they are trying to think about what would they do if they were in that situation? What have they done in the past? What resources might they want to consider? And they just talk about that for 4 minutes, and they're doing it in service of the fly on the wall. And after the 4 minutes, the person who's presented their challenge will come back on and they'll say, thank you so much, flies or bees or whatever you are. And if the person who presented wants to share, I'm sitting with this, I'm sitting with this comment, or I think this is going to be my next step, they can share that. And then that's then you're done with the first one. And then you go to the second person in the group and you repeat the same process. So you can see the recommendation is that it's 7 to 10 minutes. We'll do 7 minutes today. It will feel tight. And part of what's good about this practice is that it forces people, if they have a challenge, to get really clear fast and to do it with strangers. So you have to think about, what do I want from my peers in the next 7 minutes? And with anything, it just gets better and better with practice.